The 2025 NHL draft is now complete, so how do the Ducks perform? And to do this, I first want to discuss what the Ducks' tactics should be heading into a draft at this point in the rebuild. And the Ducks are in a situation where they have a great depth of young prospects, much more than some of those other rebuilding teams like San Jose or Chicago, even though it may not show in some of those prospect rankings because a lot of our prospects are already in the NHL. But just look at our decor with Olin Zellweger, Lacombe, Mitchikov, Hallison, Lunio, Solberg, the list goes on. The question is, across forwards and D, we don't really have, unlike San Jose and Chicago, that clear franchise player, that superstar, that Getzlaff, that Perry, that Solani, and in the case of the Sharks and the Blackhawks, we don't have that Celebrini and Bedard, respectively. Now, we do have some prospects that could be that, and definitely a good percentage chance that they may, like Carlson and Seneca, but adding another prospect with that potential is just going to increase the chance that we do strike one of those players that we desperately need. Because honestly, if we don't have a point per game player, if Carlson, especially this year, doesn't develop into that, we could be in real trouble. Let's just have a quick look at our two main prospects that could be that star. Carlson, this season, we saw excellent puck control, positioning, doing the little things right. He was very good at using his frame and his body to beat defenders in a one-on-one, to just slip a puck past him and then shield it away, or once he got up against the boards, he'd use a really good stick lift to free the puck. He was a very good board-playing, very good gritty offensive forward. That was what Cronin had kind of pushed into him, being this player that went to the front of the net, got the deflections, got the gritty goals. But that's not really how you develop a franchise player, by just getting gritty goals, because that's not what a franchise player does. And so we need to see him next year, and as I've kind of alluded to, hopefully with the change in coaching, we're going to see him increase on the playmaking side of things, on the side where he, gets into the zone, or he's playing the rush and he sets up a really nice goal, or he gets it back and he finishes one, or he drags away from a defender and gets free in the slot, or he off of a forecheck can do something really creative, rather than just the system which Cronin had been pushing, which was dump and trace, get the puck in the corner, recycle back to the line, long wrist shot, look for a deflection. And Carlson played that well for what it was worth, but we need to see him developing into something more than that. And hopefully under Q's system, which is going to be, fast, a rush hybrid kind of system, we're going to see a lot more shots, a lot more offense, a lot more freedom, and we're going to see big improvements. And he's actually got, I'd say, a really good shot. Like, his shooting percentage was really high. And if you look at him compared to a player of similar category like a Barkov, he actually's got more points and a better shooting percentage and things like that than he did. Now, I'm not going to say he's going to mature into that, because next season was the year, 3 years in, where Barkov took his big strides. So that's the same for Carlson. We're going to need to see next year him developing close to that point per game player, which Barkov did in that third season in the league. The other prospect is Seneca, and he, some said he was maybe higher than Carlson. It's sort of dwindled a little bit in terms of his prospect likelihood. Some people are a little suspicious about how he's going to actually translate his game into the NHL. Is he going to mature? Is he going to cut out some of those sneaky plays that are just turning it over? Is he going to bulk up a little bit and play the simple game, which is kind of what you need, especially in the playoffs in the NHL? It's almost kind of the opposite of Carlson a little bit. And, I think you just got to give him time to develop. But what's really exciting is his IQ and some of the crazy goals and the way that he sees the ice and his stick handling, even his shot. He's got some really high-end potential there. And yes, we're going to need a season just to see if he can tap into that, whether he plays in the NHL this year or whether they send him to juniors because I can't take him to the AHL. I think he's going to really get some good development this year, and hopefully he takes strides as well. But having said that, none of them are like a Celebrini or Bedard level already. We don't really have that franchise player yet. So adding another high upside prospect, if they genuinely have high upside in this draft, is key. And obviously you still have to ensure that that player is actually high upside, because you could also, the other hole you could fill is maybe a right-hand defense. Having said that, we've got so many prospects in our D, but yes, we do need that right-handed shooting defenseman. And definitely, it would have been a little bit tougher if Mitchell was still on the board to make the decision on McQueen. He wasn't, and by then it was sort of pretty clear what Pat would go with, I think. But Metka probably would have been good, but again, I think we need to look for high upside, and I do go back to that age-old sort of thing, which is you can always kind of find that second-pairing defenseman a little bit easier, or a lot easier than you can find a superstar in free agency or at the trade block. So let's discuss McQueen's specifically. He has really some great signs out of a small sample size. Great size, skill, compete, skating, puck control. And he's quite similar in a way to Carlson, the way that he can control the puck, use his size, get to gritty areas. He can really score in high percentage zones. He's not necessarily a playmaker, though he's shown signs that when he does get some good options, he can really make some nice slick passes. There were a few goals that he scored in his small sample size with the Wheat Kings that were elite playmaking stuff. And you look at him at training camp, he makes some really tricky plays. He's got a really good side-to-side drag, a really good backhand elevation. And the other part of him is just, he's got the signs that he could be really skillful, but he's amazing puck control. Like when he gets up against the boards, or when he gets, he wants to just hold the puck or game a zone or do simple things, he can do that really well. And that's a great skill if he can use his size, which he usually does, to really bully people around and control the ice with ease. That's going to be a big asset for him. The areas where there is concern is probably a little bit with his shot. He doesn't really have a one-timer. And I think we are kind of past the stage room in the NHL where every tall guy past like 6'2" needs to have, or every real tall player past like 6 foot needs to have that massive overbearing shot, one-timer. But he does have a wrist shot to make up for that, which is pretty solid. It's not some crazy release, but he does have the ability to pick the corners and make some nice plays and nice shots. The other concern was that was most notable was the injury. From what I've seen, I saw him say at development camp that he's feeling 100% almost. And from what I can see in the reports, it's probably been overblown a little bit. And I trust the Ducks to do their adequate medical research to ensure that McQueen is actually not going to provide some major issue and be a complete bust because he had that back injury. I think it's been overblown. I don't think it's a reason for concern. The one thing that I do think is a little bit concerning is the production that he had this season. And it may have gone a little bit over the head of everyone, but he had, with the Brandon Wheat Kings, who are a pretty average team in the WHL, they had, I think, a first-round playoff exit. He played 17 games and had 10 goals, 10 assists for 20 points. However, he scored 4 goals, including an empty netter, in his first game of the season against the worst team in the league, the Moose Jaw Warriors. So if you take away that game, he had 6 goals in 16 games. Now, there were other players who definitely found their form in the draft later in the year in terms of a production standpoint. And, that raises a question, does he have that high-end playmaking ability to be an absolute superstar? And that's probably why, more people would see him being a 2C, and I think that's fair. if he does kind of reach his potential, though he definitely does still have that superstar potential. But when you just see the way that he scored his goals, a lot of them were quite gritty and in those high percentage areas. So he'll need to, a little bit like Carlson, just take a jump in that playmaking and that production standpoint. But in a small sample size like he had, I don't think we should look too much into his production, even though a lot of his points came against teams like Moose Jaw, and I think the other really bad team was the Regina Pats. But he, has shown signs, like I said, of really good playmaking, and over a small sample size, the lack of production, which can be obviously from more things than playmaking, but it just looked like most of his goals there wasn't enough of that, and if he had more, it probably would have increased his production. But I don't think over that small sample size, it's a big room for concern. The other option was Eklund, and, though I like Eklund and he skates well and he's a two-way forward, and that's something that we need probably in this organization, more two-way players. We've drafted quite a bit of players that haven't really had that defensive capabilities, McTavish, Seagrass, etc. But, Eklund, he doesn't really have that high-end potential, though he has the ability to make some really nice plays and has a pretty solid shot and does the simple things right. He doesn't have anywhere near that high-end potential that McQueen has, that we, like I said at the start with my philosophy for this draft, McQueen is kind of better suiting for that. So a quick look at the later rounds before we wrap up. It's nothing really bad or shocking, whilst at the same time the later round picks aren't necessarily anything that stands out and you go, wow. It's just pretty straightforward. They take Nilsson at 46, and he's got a great shot, high compete. The high-end skill isn't necessarily there, but that kind of fits Verbeek's model and what the Ducks usually do in the later rounds. They like to drive high upside in the first round, Seneca, McQueen, etc. But when you get to the later rounds, they seem to not do that as much. And here with Nilsson, I think he's more just a solid, projectable, bottom six forward who should be a good help in the NHL. He had a couple of other interesting picks. Lassie Bolus is, I think, how you say it. He, a strong skater. This time, again, another pretty solid defensive player. He's a stay-at-home left-shooting defenseman. Probably don't need more of those, but anyway. And that's good to see that Verbeek is picking defensive players. Again, not players necessarily of a higher upside, but they all kind of fit the Verbeek model, though they aren't the tallest. They're pretty big. One person that doesn't fit that was Noah Reid, but from what I hear, he's a gritty player. Drew Schock was ranked 53rd by Prongman, and the Ducks took him 101st. Sounds like a steal. Again, he's small, but he's really good. He's a really good skater, and that's another common theme. Verbeek wants people that can get around the ice well, and that's going to help with defense, which is something that's kind of a little bit overlooked in this organization. They drafted a goalie. We'll see how he develops in our systems. They drafted Alexei Mathew, who's a left-shooting defenseman. Big, mobile, mean, physical, but he doesn't really have a puck game, so I don't know if he'll reach the NHL, but definitely sounds like Verbeek's sort of guy. I mean, a few other players, like the teammate of Roger McQueen, Brady Churiko to round it out. I mean, a surprising player who, in terms of the fact that he has fallen this far compared to where he was projected to be at the start of the draft season, Emily Guhle. He was supposed to be in the first round, but he got down all the way to 159 after a really bad season, but we'll see if the Ducks can pick him back up. So, in conclusion, a pretty solid draft for the Ducks. They go high upside and get a player that they need to add to their list of players that could be their potential franchise star in Roger McQueen, and they don't shock too much, but they get the job done in the later rounds. Let me know what you thought of the draft in the comment section below. Thank you for listening to this episode of DuckDuckGoal.